Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. In this episode, I'm joined by Hugo Felix, and we are talking about how a collaborative culture plays a role into effectiveness of the quality management system and the risk management system. Hugo has enormous experience in the industry, ranging from small organizations to large organizations, medical devices, IVDs, and pharmaceutical companies. So he has a lot of experience in the area of culture and how it affects our ability to do quality management right. We discussed this topic in front of a live audience as part of a LinkedIn live audio event, and you are about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So Hugo, welcome. It's great to have you here, and please go ahead and introduce yourself to the crowd.
Thanks, Naveen. First of all, thanks for having me here and the kind of introduction, and thanks to your great audience for being here. I know we'll have definitely a valuable discussion. Just a little bit of background, right? I always say 25 years plus in the industry in different capacities and different areas. I stopped counting at 25 just to try and not date myself, but I will anyways through the discussion. And I worked in devices, in vitro diagnostics, pure pharma, and as well as combination products with both device primary mode of action and pharma primary mode of action. And we'll talk through some of those lessons learned through those 25 years plus. And on a more personal note, I happen to married father of twins, but just about to become an empty nester because those twins are graduating from high school.
Wow, so I did not know this, Hugo, but looks like that you and I have something in common. My twins are graduating next year, and it's been an interesting ride. So it's interesting to know, hear that from you and your experience as well. So that I know you have a broad experience, and more importantly, I think you have seen different working cultures, small organizations, large organizations, matrix organizations, and you have seen like the whole spectrum. And I think that is where it becomes fascinating for us to learn from you. And I'm very curious, what does a culture of collaboration feel like? How does it feel when you are in a culture of collaboration?
Sure. And so we were talking a little bit about this before, right? And like I said, in the QMS and design control and as in risk management, right? This is really a team sport. Right? That's the devices get more complex, and we address these things. There's a lot of value in the cross-functional teams looking at these things from different lenses, right? And then making sure you're completely addressed effectively what the target is. And so I think, you want to make sure that all those viewpoints are captured well and the process is done well. You want to make sure you create an environment where that is possible, right? Where there's good communication, the structure, or the solutions that you pick fit the culture and the structure of the organization, right? And where you drive consistent execution of risk management, for example, across different business units and, when you bring together different functions. And so that, it does require work, it does require the support of top management, and it does require monitoring, right? Because there's certain things that could come through and sort of upset the apple cart.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to stay on top of these things. And top management has to really provide the resources, right? The time even to stay up with standards and monitor warning letters, recalls, right? And what products have launched that impact the state of the art. And I mean, you're actually a resource I use, right, to stay informed. You put out these great newsletters, right? But that's sort of the constant state of scanning for what's happening and then bringing that back in from your viewpoint into a cross-functional team setting that drives this.
So in that context, Hugo, I know we always say top management has to kind of drive this, set the tone. We always say that. And if you look at it, I think in most cases they do. And then we also say that everybody in the team should be empowered to speak up. And in some cases they do, some cases they don't. And yet, I worked in the industry also for 20 years. And my experience is you have pockets of excellence in an organization where collaboration happens. And there are areas within the same organization, it doesn't happen. So I think my question, I'm interested to hear from you, what is the secret sauce, right? We are saying all these things, but what is the secret sauce to collaboration?
So I think, great question, Naveen. And I think one of the key things, right? Everybody has to be clear as to what are we, the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, right? I'll give an example of some of the challenge around this that I've had, and it probably makes it easier, right? I've worked in, for example, combination products, and you bring device experts with pharma experts, for example, and you not only need to communicate, you need to understand if you're talking the same language, right? Stability is a term that exists on both sides, and it means sort of similar thing, but pharmaceutical stability and device stability, different things, right? And so that's an example of where you can be speaking about the same topic, and then walk away thinking there's agreement, and walk away still understanding different things, right? And so later when the execution happens, it's like, wait, what happened? I thought we agreed. How do we miss each other? So, what went wrong? And so I think, for example, in that type of an environment, I always find helpful. It's like, you can't just stop at the conceptual we understand each other. You have to go a level deeper and go through and walk through specific examples to ensure you're aligned, right? You sort of have to validate that alignment. And so that's an example of what I say, it takes practice, right? And it takes concerted effort to ensure you stay aligned. And so it's not just wanting to communicate, right? But making sure you go that extra step and validate that, yes, I don't only think we had alignment, I tested for that alignment.
So that, Hugo, in organizations or cultures where you see this happening, do you see this happen spontaneously? That, some people raise their hand and say, are we sure we are aligned? Are we sure we are understanding each other? Do you think it is happening spontaneously, or do you think there is some kind of an assigned role of a facilitator or a leader who is managing all this? How does this happen?
Yeah, so I've been in both scenarios, right, where there was a facilitator and where there wasn't. And I would tell you that where there wasn't, sometimes, and I can speak to these personally, right? Sometimes you have to get the scars and figure that out.
Yeah.
And then that sort of builds that practice where you as an individual start doing that and then share that to those learnings to other people so that you can create that culture, right, within your team first and then across the teams you operate. But I think where there's complexity in the organization, right, where we're doing large systems with big systems that are themselves development, I've seen risk coaches do this very effectively, right? Guard for the making sure we have a consistent approach of risk management across different subsystems that bring in different expertise, right? But trying to stay under the framework and executing, for example, risk management consistently across the organization. So I think it can be done both ways, right? Yeah. It really works well if everybody's sort of minding the store, right, and looking for it. But you can drive it through facilitators.
Yeah, and I think when you and I were chatting briefly just before we went live, you shared a very interesting example. I'm hoping you can share that again. When we are working on different areas like software, the device, the integration, the system, the patient, like how do these pieces work together with each other, and what happens when there is an issue? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And so, software brings up a particular challenge. I don't think we talked about this, but I've been in a health and wellness company that had nothing to do with devices and was trying to turn their product the other way, right? From a health and wellness, what I would term commercial, right, consumer product, into a device. And so I was kind of like employee number one for devices and trying to explain to some folks, some software, really good software developers, and no medical device experience about, hey, we need to do eventually design validation of the entire product and, inclusive of all the systems. And they're like, well, yeah, don't worry about it. We do software validation, right? We'll get to that. So, well, in our language, right, and that's another kind of translation, right? Is that software validation is more in the design verification space. There's a step beyond that, right, that you need to do. And so I think that piece, right, when we're running through that, and again, I'll go back to the understanding, watching out for those. And then the other piece, when you get some of these complex organizations, and even it may not need to be the complex organization. A complex product can also bring this forward, right? But we have to check for those interfaces, right, where the software is sort of handing off to the hardware. What can happen in between, right? And those interfaces and minding those areas where those interfaces happens are as well something you really have to keep, because and we talked about this, right? The customer doesn't really care. It's like, hey, your software people did they care.
Hugo, it looks like I lost you for a moment. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now. I lost you briefly. You were saying something about the customer perspective.
Correct. And so, right, the customer doesn't really care about, hey, the software, your software guys didn't do this. It's like the product does not deliver this function. Right. And so I always tell my team, it's like, sometimes, especially in the combination space, we have these divisions of what gets done by the pharmaceutical side or the device side, and the same in the reverse. But you can have that between like the software team, right, or the machine, which is a subsystem of an entire system, right? If you find an issue that does interfaces or an issue that doesn't fall under your responsibility, it's like, okay, great. So whose is it, and how do you communicate that, right? And so wherever you find these things in the organization, we should be looking out, right? Because the goal is patient safety. It's not just I do my role, but if I find a risk that I don't know if it's been already covered, right? You need to have that open communication, even across beyond your responsibility.
Yeah.
So that we know we're driving
right.
patient safety.
So I feel like Hugo, in principle and theory, this sounds interesting and good, but I think that the test of the system or the culture is in the moment of crisis. So let's take an example of a recall. And unfortunately, recalls are common in our industry despite our best efforts. And we cannot predict what kind of crisis we will face tomorrow. So I think that there might be some secret sauce in a culture that could handle a recall much better than others. Would you agree with that statement, or there's no connection? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think in a culture where the communication is open and flows quickly, I think you have a much better chance of handling a recall effectively, right? I think I've worked in organizations where sort of the information seems to be this proprietary thing that I don't want to let go because then I lose, right? This power I have by having this. And I'm reminded, I have a really good friend that always says, hey, the data, the information belongs to the product, and you're at your service, you work on behalf of that product because that's how you deliver, right, the value to the patient. Okay. And so we really have to be mindful, share across boundaries, and share our view and our, right, that the lens through which we see the issues and our part, so that when all of those come together, like I say, that's just another facet of that team sport, right? When all those views come together, we can make a better decision.
And you're not pointing fingers. You are saying together we own the whole problem. How do we solve it? So let me then ask you just a very quick follow-up question. Again, I'm very interested. I know it's supposed to happen, but in day-to-day situation, it's difficult not to point fingers, honestly. Things happen. And that's the storming part. Like once an event has happened, teams are storming and they have to norm and basically work together. And again, I would like to explore like what is holding it all together? Are there people who are respected in leadership positions? They are calling out, hey guys, we got to kind of move on. Or together the team collectively realizes that they have to make progress. How does this happen? I'm very curious to hear about that.
I do think that obviously from the top, right, you have to model that. But I think as you go down, right, I'll bring in my personal example, right. I always try to model that from my team. And I'm reminded of one of those, I have some of these speeches I gave when I hire people. It's like, hey, it's great, especially younger engineers as they're moving up the change into kind of leadership roles. It's like, I didn't hire you because you fit the bill and are going to be perfect, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to make mistakes along the way. Mm-hmm. And the QMS is actually built, if you think about it, right? There are mistakes that are made. The question is, do we react to them quickly and effectively?
Yeah.
Does the system work for us to let us improve? And are we driving that improvement, right? And so that sharing of that, those issues and understanding that, hey, you got an issue and you bring it forward, and it's how do we solve it together, and how do we use these systems, right? And how do the processes help you?
So I'm hearing you say a very important thing here, which is I think a key insight is as a leader, when you recruit people, when you lead people, you set the expectations and you set the tone and you live that through example. And hopefully there's a critical mass of leaders who are exhibiting that behavior, and that's how the culture may shape. Is that kind of a right reading that I have based on what you said?
Definitely. And I mean, you're just spot on, right? I mean, I think you, right. It comes from the top, but every leader within that levels of the organizations has to model that, mm-hmm. right? And that expectation and watch out and make sure that it happens. And if it doesn't, right, go in and try and correct that.
Yes.
That behavior, right? We're gonna make mistakes. It's not. I had the speech from when I was young myself from a great manager of mine. So it's like, hey, asking you to be perfect, but if there's an issue, let's just bring it forward and resolve it together.
Awesome. And I think that's where the critical mass will happen, when there's enough of such leaders across the organization. So great. Guys, we are at a point now where I would love to have you get involved. So the way to do that, here you go, David. So I'm going to bring you to stage, but everybody, if you want to participate, please raise your hand virtually, and you can find that in the 3 dots on the profile picture that you have, and request to speak. And I will bring you on stage. And don't wait. Raise your hand and I'll start bringing you up. So we will have a good conversation. So go ahead, please, David, go ahead, unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Thank you, Naveen. And thank you, Hugo. This is fascinating. I'm just riveted. And it's kind of a field that I'm also fascinated with. So I have a complicated question for you a little bit. The first is kind of looking beyond, say, individual products and mechanisms, but looking at the entire organization, cross-functional, as you put. What are some of the newest and maybe most effective techniques or tools that you're employing today to deal with that? And then the second part of my question is, are you looking at some of the newer mathematical tools to actually measure this interaction, such as game theory or causal theory or mechanism theory? I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Great question. I will say we haven't looked at game theory and causal theory as far. I will say, as far as tools, we have pockets like every organization, and I'll speak across the board, but to my experience past, right? I think if you go to different organizations, you'll see anything from paper-based to Excel to trying to move. I think the big move is to move into some of these digital platforms that make reuse of some of the aspects that can be reused easier, make us more efficient, so that we spend more time not on the sort of the administration of it, but on the value of the thought process and getting to those risk mitigations being established. The other piece I will say, from a system perspective, haven't gotten to game theory, but we talked a little bit about this, Naveen, right? The oversight of the process, right? Making sure the process is effectively handling the issues and making sure that the taking a step back as a whole, engaging the health of the process, and are we really addressing risks, right? Are there any misses? Are there any new developments that could kind of upset the apple cart and force us to go in a new direction? I'll give the example of something, right? AI and ML is all the rage, and it's hit through devices as well. And we know that there's a lot of activity in terms of new standards, right, around those, and standards even around how risk is applied to devices with AML. I can bring the example of that Amy consensus report. That's the first time I've ever seen a consensus report being adopted by FDA. It's now turned into technical inspection report, right? 34971, I believe its number, which deals with the application of 14971 to AI/ML enabled devices, and it's a guidance for that. And so I think the other piece around that, a lot of times we, and we pursue it, right? Computational modeling and how we can get smarter and more efficient. But don't discount just good old fashioned as well monitoring, and scanning kind of where products are going, and then making sure that your processes are capable, flexible enough or account for these things, or can handle, if not, the change needed to be able to drive right to the products you're going to expect to be launching in the future.
So what I'm hearing you say, Hugo, is that of course we have to be watching out and keeping up with what's happening in the industry with new tools, new know-how. But I feel like, and would love to hear your thoughts on it, I feel like we need translators. We need good translators who can translate what's happening in the external world appropriately in a way that we can implement internally in our organization. Right? We can't really copy paste.
Correct. Right. And I think 2 points along that. I mean, one is like the solutions we implement have to work in the culture and the organization.
Right.
And so that has a requirement. And you need to have, some of your stronger folks looking out, and a number of them looking out for what's developing right out there, what new standards are coming, what new issues, because standards are friends, right? And then when you bring them in, you still have to. It's not sort of a copy and paste. Copy paste. The standard tells me to do this, right? It is okay. Let's think through this. How does this apply? Could we have any issues? How do we generate the data to make sure we're following appropriately these things? So definitely, there's work involved in this, right?
Great. So David, you are still on stage, so you have it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, go ahead. But I want to invite other people as well. Please engage, share your thoughts. I know you guys have experiences and insights. I'm going to bring Subi, but while we wait for Subi, David, go ahead. If you have any other thoughts, please.
Well, thank you, Hugo. This could go on forever. I'm just fascinated. So one of the things in particular I'm curious about is what types of success have you had in getting buy-in at the executive level? The people that are sort of being driven by cost and really short-term profit-driven type ideas, which can be very much at odds with designing a safe and effective product.
Yeah, if any, it's been my experience, but I do think, making the case for patient safety is not usually hard. Now, you have to be pragmatic, and you're right, you have to make sure you understand your audience. But in at least in my example, in the pharma and even in the device, and combination products, patient safety is regarded as very high importance. And so, I think once you do present the case and how it ties to patient safety, and make sure you address that. And we have great tools, right? ISO 14971, you may have QRM, right? If your process is that's implemented is good, and you follow that process, you go with the information to be able to get them to a data-driven decision, right? And the level of detail that we have kind of through sort of summarize so that a good decision is made. And I would say, and so skin in the game, right? What's my proposed solution? We can have those discussions and drive forward. And I'll go back to the collaboration, right? It's not always what I thought it would be. Mm-hmm. There's always, once the discussion is had, a path forward we can all get behind and we know is taking into account.
And also I will add to that, Hugo, I think I agree with you. Patient safety is considered to be absolutely important. However, I have seen it happen. We cannot use patient safety as an excuse to push another agenda. So you will be challenged. I believe in a collaborative environment, you will be challenged for the business case. And you just can't say patient safety without being able to really talk about it in a holistic way. So Subi, and I know we're going to run against the clock very soon. So Subi, you are very patient. Thank you for joining, and please unmute your mic, share what you have in mind.
Yes. Hi, Hugo. Long time no talk. I miss you hearing you talk. So my question really has two parts. You touched on the combination product space a little bit, but I was wondering if you could talk about collaboration on drug and device risk management, 14971 versus QRM, and maybe avoiding redundant work. And then secondary to that, one personal struggle that I've seen as a junior engineer doing risk assessments, and then, as I've gained experience participating in group risk assessments, is the, how much do you do on your own to get the conversation started versus getting everybody in a room and filling out a blank template. So if you could maybe address those two things. Hope the question makes sense.
No, and thanks, Sylvia. Great to hear you as well. I haven't heard you in a while. But I think from the drug device perspective, I think it is an area that's actually changing. And I was actually kind of combing through, QRM space. It's sort of changing, and I understand moving a little bit more towards highlighting patient safety than just product quality. I think, to me, the framework of AV TIR 105, right, that is done for combination products, is a strong one. But I think the challenge is, in order to integrate really well, there's work to be done to change practices in the organization, and so that's I would say still an ongoing process. But there's certainly tons of value that we can learn, or get from both sides to avoid redundancies, like you said, from the QRM space. And, I think, that any drug development, risk assessments and how they feed into the device space, there's definitely areas where more collaboration can be had. I think it's a work in progress. I think the standards are recognizing that are coming out. And it's an area where we're going to start converging and being more efficient. But at least from my experience, there's still work to be done, as you well know. The second piece, right? You were saying, as a junior engineer, how much do you bring in? I think there's a couple of I've been in multiple scenarios, right? Areas where somebody kind of gets some work done to get kickstarted, in areas where you start with a blank slate, and cross-functionally folks go through and focus kind of like that one column at a time. I think it depends on the organization and the culture, but definitely I think there's practices and tools as well. Let's not disregard the tools. I think it's an area that we need to move more and more across in all organizations into the digital space. So there's definitely reuse of information and knowledge that can be the starting point that makes us more efficient.
But I think, Hugo, I really like how you kind of integrated the cultural aspect to this feeling or practice of encouraging junior engineers to participate. I love this. And guys, I know we can go on and on forever this topic. fascinating, obviously, a lot bigger than that. So I do want to share with you a few housekeeping points. Then I'll invite Hugo for very brief closing comments. As you guys know, we plan for only 30 minutes, but we meet every week. So if there are topics of interest that require more discussion, reach out to me and we will focus on them again. So here are very few key housekeeping points. Mark your calendars for 11 a.m. Eastern every Friday, regardless of the topic. If you are interested, that way you will know when to come. And if you miss it, I produce the recordings with key highlights of a summary that you can read in an article on my newsletter. And that is published on a weekly basis. You can subscribe. The link is in the event notice here. There's a link. You can go subscribe there. And finally, what I would say, guys, all of you have insights and experiences to share. So if you ever so desire to be a guest speaker, as you know, this is a very casual conversation. No stress, no preparation. Please reach out to me and let me know if you are interested. With that, I want to thank you guys again and invite Hugo for some closing thoughts on this topic.
Hey, thanks for the invitation and thanks to you always for the engagement and great questions. Go back to the point, sure, about this is a useful, right? The football analogy, bear with me, right? There's offense, there's defense, and special, right? But you need to look at these different areas, different skill sets, and for those interfaces all the way as well. But you know, the impact you can add on the products and our payments and some of these things, so it's definitely working out.
That's awesome, Hugo. Right. But I will say to that, even every good football team still requires a good coach. So I'm hoping that the culture has cultivated these coaches who can really help achieve those goals where we have star players and they do very well in each of their specialties. Guys, again, thank you so much for joining. Hugo, thanks so much for giving us your time and insights. David, Subi, thank you for coming on and joining this conversation. Guys, I hope you are enjoying this. Let me know through the react button how you are feeling. And I hope to see you again next week. Keep an eye on the recording and the highlights in an article that could come your way every week if you subscribe. With that, again, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend. It's a long weekend, so have a good weekend and we will meet next week again. Bye-bye.